Hi everybody, my name is Rebecca Bell. I work here at Old Sturbridge Village as the collections manager and curator of textiles, and today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about ways in which people took care of their clothes, including mending and darning, as well as alterations not only for fit but also for fashion. The darning, especially on stockings, tends to be typically on the heel and the toe, the two places of the stocking that are worn the most. And at a certain point, after the heel and the toe have been darned and darned again, it starts to get a little bit uncomfortable. And at that point, rather than throwing out the stockings, you would go one step further and do a little domestic surgery and literally cut the whole toe or the whole heel off of your stocking, very carefully pick up the stitches on your knitting needles and knit on a whole fresh toe or fresh heel, as is the case right here. So it seems like a lot of work, but when you think about the amount of labor it took to make that entire pair of stocking, either a pair of half hose that go up to your knee or a pair of full hose that go all the way up your leg, it seems a little bit more reasonable that you're going to try and take every step to make sure you don't have to knit an entirely new pair of stockings every time you get a hole. What I love about some of our stockings in the collection too is they show this process either being on the needles or with a very distinct color change in the foot. So you can see very clearly that this material is a little bit different from the material used in the foot of the stocking. And sometimes the gauge of the stitches even changes a little bit as well. So the stockings in our collection have clearly gone through multiple periods of repair and mending. Another technique that folks are using to maintain their clothing is patching and mending. And it would be pretty common for ladies in the 19th century to have a little bag or a basket full of scraps that could be pulled into use for mending and maintaining the clothing. The places that tend to get patched most often, of course, work clothes tend to require upkeep a little bit more than the fancier clothes, though you certainly do see some patching on the fancy clothes. And places like knees and elbows and all of the usual suspects where we usually find ourselves getting holes as well, particularly on children's garments. So this sweet little gown has had a patch on the elbow, and she's used not quite the same but a very similar blue check material to neatly patch that. And this little boy's skeleton suit worn by Tristan Little, who in 1815 was about 2 years old and lived in New Hampshire. And you can see that it has two very big patches on the knees and a little patch right on the seat of his trousers. So by doing neat patchwork, you would be able to extend the life cycle of these clothes a little bit longer, and especially with children's clothes, they're being passed down perhaps from one sibling to the next or one generation to the next. So keeping them in good order is really, really helpful. Folks are not just patching, but also altering their clothes as well. And in some cases, doing it very discreetly so that when you look at the clothing from the front, you're not really seeing how they've altered it. This vest is a good example of that from the front. It looks like any other standard vest, but from the side and the back, you can see that there's a little bit of fabric added under the armpit to expand it just an inch or so. And in the back, it's had a little bit of expansion right at the center there. So again, increasing the width of the vest, but without creating any sort of look of being increased from the front. Fabrics definitely have a life cycle, as do pieces of clothing. So you're going to patch and mend and maintain your clothing for as long as you can, but at a certain point, it becomes something that you just can't feasibly do anymore. The fabric is too weak, it's been patched and mended too many times. So at that point, you look at ways to take that garment and turn it into something else. So you might take a gown, for instance, and cut the skirt out. The skirt generally is a large piece of fabric that doesn't have a lot of wear to it. So you can take that amount of fabric and turn it into something else like a child's garment. Or you might take pieces that are in relatively decent shape and turn them into patches for a quilt. You might put them into a scrap bag that you can then draw from when you are repairing some of your garments. Or you might do, as the maker of this pocket did, and just take some of those little scraps and piece them all together willy-nilly to make a little pocket. After the scraps have gone through the whole life cycle and they're really too far gone to use them anymore, you find women collecting them into bags, particularly cotton and linen, and then selling them on for credit. So those scraps of cotton and linen could then go to the paper manufacturers, and paper was being made out of those scraps. So really, from inception and creation of the garment all the way through to the very end of the life cycle, where that fabric is being turned ultimately into paper, you have multiple steps where you can economize and make your garments last as long as possible. Folks in the 19th century weren't only maintaining their clothing by mending and patching and darning, but they were also altering their clothing in terms of fit and in terms of fashion. A lot of clothing that was designed to be passed down from one generation to the next, especially children's clothing, had built-in ways to alter it to fit a different body. A lot of drawstring closures at the neck and the waist, growth tucks in the hem that could be either let out to expand the hem or taken back up to shorten the garment, or even just large cuffs that could be let out or taken in depending on who was wearing it. It wasn't only children's garments that were designed or altered to fit the form of a new body. Sometimes adult clothing was also changed and altered as the wearer may have changed shape over time. Or in terms of this dress, probably changed shape but also wanted to adjust the fit in other ways. This dress was made in 1830 originally for a lady named Hope Marino Potter. She wore it originally as her wedding dress, but as was common in the early 19th century, your wedding dress was also your nicest dress, so you'd be wearing it many times after your wedding. And as she grew, she perhaps decided that she wanted to alter the neckline a little bit. It was probably originally a fairly off-the-shoulder dress, and she has added a little bit of stitching in the center bodice and a little bit at the sleeve, and all that does is take the neckline up just a little bit and perhaps make it a little bit more modest for a more mature lady. She also expanded it a little bit, very cleverly. The original dress had beautiful scalloped cuffs on those long sleeves, and she took one of those scalloped cuffs and took it off and added it to the back of her dress. And what that does is it expands the back of the dress bodice by about 3 to 4 inches. She's added a few extra hooks and eyes to try and close that gap a little bit. And from the front, you would never know that it has been altered. She also took the waistband out, which had originally been gathered all the way around, and made some larger pleats in the front, and that gives you a little bit of extra room in the skirt to accommodate that extra width in the back that she has added. So she changed the fit a little bit for fashion, a little bit for her form, but in other cases you might find folks altering a dress just for the sake of keeping up with the latest fashions. So in the 1830s, one of the most common ways that you could do this was by changing some of the sleeves. The sleeve in the early 1830s had a lot of fullness right at the shoulder, and as the 1830s progressed, you have that fullness moving slowly down until it's located by your elbow, and by the 1840s, the sleeve is much straighter and much more tailored. So you can imagine if you have a gown that had that 1830s sleeve with the big fullness right at the top, and it's getting a little bit out of date and old-fashioned, it would be very easy to tack the top of that sleeve down. In this case, this sleeve just has a little bit of gathering to create that slimmer look up by your shoulder, and that naturally moves the fullness and that puff down to your elbow. So you don't even need to take the entire sleeve out and redo it, although that's certainly possible. In this case, all you would need to do is just add a few lines of gathering. You could also disguise other elements of the dress that might be a little bit old-fashioned, such as a higher waistline. In the 1830s, the waistline is slowly moving down towards your natural waist. And if you happen to have a waistband that's a little wide and a little bit high, you could disguise that by using a nice belt or creating a beautiful collar or something that can take the sort of focus away from that older fashion and kind of create a newer style that's more in keeping with the later 1830s. So all of these would be things that women are considering and actively doing, rather than, if your dress gets a little bit out of date, tossing the dress and buying material to make an entirely new one. And it really is quite a clever way to make just a few alterations or add a few decorative accessories to update your dress. And you find ladies are doing this not only with their dresses, but with other accessories like their bonnets as well.